afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this installment of Exploring Sustainable Seafood. My name is Kim Thompson. I'm the director of the Aquarium of the Pacific's Seafood for the Future program. Science plays an important role in helping us understand the world around us. It also plays a critical role in designing and developing sustainable solutions to meet some of our biggest challenges, including feeding a growing population in a changing climate. We've discussed in this series a lot about what the science says, but ultimately the science means little to nothing if it isn't actually used. Government and industry stakeholders, including fishermen and seafood farmers, play a really important role in applying science in the real world. Today we're going to be joined by government and industry experts who are going to discuss their respective roles in putting sustainability in sustainable seafood. I'm pleased to welcome our panelists. We have Danielle Blacklock with NOAA Fisheries Office of Aquaculture. We have Dick Jones with Blue Ocean Mariculture, and Rob Johnson with CPAC. You can find their bios and additional resources from this and other discussions in this series at aquariumofpacific.org. Now let's start by getting to know a little bit about our panelists. Rob, we're going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about CPAC and your role there? And is what you're doing now anywhere close to what you thought you were going to be doing when you first applied for college?
Oh, thank you very much, Kim. Pleasure to be here. I'm Rob Johnson, the Managing Director for CPAC, which is a pre-competitive collaboration of leading American and Canadian seafood companies that are focused on improving seafood sustainability and business responsibility through their combined leverage and resources. And so taken together, the 10 CPAC companies would represent the 4th largest seafood company in North America and the 15th largest in the world. And CPAC's vision is for a vibrant and resilient industry in which all seafood is produced, traded, and consumed responsibly. And so since 2013, when seafood started, it's developed from a project funding vehicle to a thought and action industry leadership platform. And CPAC members are in the middle of the supply chain, which is a unique and strategic position to influence, leverage, and change both upstream and downstream. So I manage the grant funding process. I lead the strategic development of the organization and the implementation of CPAC's strategic priority work plans. And I engage and partner with relevant stakeholders in industry, NGOs, governments, and foundations. So for me, I've always had a passion for the ocean and marine life. I studied a master's degree in natural resource and ecosystem management at Stockholm University at the Stockholm Resilience Center. And it was based on the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment 20 years ago, which was the largest and most comprehensive scientific analysis on the state of the planet's ecosystems. And it made a startling conclusion to me that marine ecosystems are not only the most important ecosystem to the planet's functioning, but the most degraded. And so that's a pretty compelling case to put my focus and efforts in that area. And sustainable seafood is one of the clearest and most tangible ways to engage to improve marine ecosystem health. So that's a little bit about how I got there and what I'm doing with CPAC.
Great, and we look forward to learning more as we continue in this discussion. So Dick, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit about Blue Ocean Mariculture and your role there? And is what you're doing now anywhere close to what you thought you were going to be doing when you first applied to college?
Thank you, Kim. My name is Dick Jones. I'm the CEO of Blue Ocean Mariculture. We're currently the only U.S. open ocean aquaculture operation for finfish in the United States. We grow Seriola rivoliana, otherwise known as Kampachi, half-mile offshore of Kona, Hawaii in state waters. We're currently permitted for up to 2,400 metric tons of Kampachi per year, and we look to do things in a very responsible and sustainable way here. Personally, I started in the seafood industry in 1986. And I remember going to the Boston seafood auction with my grandfather when there were days when there were 2 million pounds of fish landed, and I thought there would be fish forever. And over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, there was a severe decline of fish in the Northwest Atlantic Ocean, and our family business, which was around for generations, went bankrupt. It's given me the passion to work towards a more sustainable seafood supply and looking to ways to ensure that we can do things in a sustainable manner.
Great. And Danielle, over to you. Sticking with the aquaculture theme, can you talk a little bit about your role at NOAA's Office of Aquaculture, and is what you're doing now anywhere close to what 18-year-old Danielle thought she was going to be doing when she applied for college?
Sure thing. So I work for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a US government agency charged with science and regulatory programs related to our oceans and our atmosphere. In the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, I am the director of the Office of Aquaculture, which means that I lead the aquaculture component of our sustainable seafood portfolio. I lead the strategic visioning for aquaculture, looking at growing domestic aquaculture into the future and what the government's role can be in that, as well as I currently am leading the efforts to meet the goals of a new executive order that was published in May. And that executive order is on promoting American seafood competitiveness and economic growth. This is actually very closely aligned with what I thought I would be doing when I was 18. I think that that is a really rare case, and very few people are doing what they sort of quote unquote went to school for. But I studied marine science and then later on studied aquaculture. And the whole time that I was in school, I actually put myself through school by being a professional cook. And my sort of passions of food and ocean science combine in the seafood space. And aquaculture makes sense because I'm really interested in making sure that we have enough food for our growing population. And this is one of the most effective and efficient ways that we can make sure we do that. So it really makes sense to my passions.
Great. And I feel like I've known you for a while now, and it's really exciting to learn that you were into the culinary arts. Next time we see each other, you're going to have to whip up some good seafood. But let's start with the big picture. And Danielle, we're going to stick with you. Why does a government organization like NOAA care about sustainability, and how do these efforts to support sustainable seafood fit into the broader portfolio of also supporting economically viable fisheries and seafood?
Sustainability is really the name of the game when it comes to NOAA. We are looking at promoting the conservation and use of our natural resources in the ocean environment. So that may mean protecting endangered species that live in the marine environment, and it also means making sure that we sustainably use natural resources that we extract, like fish or other seafood for our use. As a part of that, we look at aquaculture as a way to lead us into this frontier of sustainability into the future. To us, we have the opportunity to make sure that the United States is a global leader when it comes to sustainable aquaculture. We already are in many ways. We have some of the strictest environmental laws in the world that our fishermen and aquaculture producers adhere to. And now we just need to grow that industry. When we think about sustainability, we think about it as that sort of term, the triple bottom line, where it's not just the ecological sustainability, but we're also trying to make sure that these projects and new aquaculture ventures are also economically sustainable. How can we help them be so? And so we're looking at the social sustainability. Are we making sure that aquaculture goes into places that aren't being used by others that are really important? Can we also make sure that they go in places where those jobs are really needed in those communities? So when we look at sustainability of seafood and aquaculture in particular, we're really looking across all three of those important sectors of sustainability.
Great. So Dick, Danielle just mentioned kind of the bigger picture from a government perspective of the role of sustainability in seafood and why that matters. So can you tell us from the role of a seafood farmer, why does Blue Ocean Mariculture care about sustainability? And how does sustainability impact your bottom line, which is to make money?
Danielle's spot on. I spent the last decade working in the NGO sector, and strictly looking at the environmental sustainability or environmental impacts of any operation certainly is great for the sustainability of the oceans and healthy oceans, but there needs to be economic and social responsibility as well if a company is going to succeed and be profitable. So we look at sustainability as a holistic picture of the work that we do. And it's not just looking at the offshore operations, it's looking at how we do things onshore, things like recycling, alternative energy sources, and other ways that we can be better stewards of natural resources and look for things that contribute to our bottom line that aren't just necessarily an expense, but think about them in a way that from a business and value proposition, we can look at it as a way to enhance how we do business and enhance our bottom line.
Okay, so Dick just walked us through some of the things that Blue Ocean Mariculture is doing as an individual business, but Rob, you deal with a number of members from throughout the supply chain. So can you tell us how why does sustainability matter to CPAC and its members, and how does it impact the bottom line of these businesses?
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, CPAC members are individual leaders in their industry on sustainability, whether through responsible sourcing or environmental packaging or community relations and support, and engaging and investing in fishery and aquaculture improvement projects. But one of the things, the big actions they took was forming and growing CPAC, and to build trust with competitors, to learn from each other, to challenge each other, and to create a leading industry platform that's a pre-competitive nature. And I think Danielle and Dick both spoke to the triple bottom line aspect, and that's the importance for all CPAC members, not just the economic aspect of success, but the environmental and the social, and they're all key to be integrated to be able to be sustainable and profitable and responsible businesses in this reality, this world that we live in now.
So Rob, we're going to stick with you on this question. So now I want to get just a little bit more specific, and I want to know, what role do certifications play in helping some of your members be more sustainable? And does the efficacy of certifications change in a country with strong regulatory frameworks to protect the environment like the US?
Well, certifications play a key role, but not the only role. They work in concert with rating systems and other tools and approaches. Yes, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to a global industry which transgresses boundaries across countries with very different regulatory frameworks, monitoring and enforcement for both environmental and social protections. But certification is a tool that addresses or aims to address the impacts of fishing and aquaculture on the marine environment. And I think certifications have played a good role as a catalyst for change. They've been useful identifying gaps in sustainable seafood production and governance. And they've helped propel a regime shift in how producers and governments engage the sustainable seafood movement. And with certifications, you have eco-labels that have helped compel both industry and government regulators to become more proactive over the last decade in addressing sustainability concerns. So, for increased data transparency, improved research and analysis, and more timely policy implementation from the government, certifications have been central to those positive changes.
So just to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly, certifications are a very valuable tool, and they can help the supply chain be more sustainable, more transparent. They can help with some of the science and policy with that kind of push-pull, but it's not a one-size-fits-all.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. It's a global industry, and as you stated with your question, the regulatory framework in the US and Canada and developed countries, is very different than many of the countries where seafood are sourced from or farmed, and so the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work there. And I think certifications have adapted and are finding ways to be effective in small-scale fisheries and other types of environments to help push the needle and move things forward with their framework.
Great. So we've heard about kind of more broadly the role that certifications can play. So Dick, you have a farm. You guys have sought certifications. So can you talk a little bit more about why you decided to go for certifications and the role that they play for a business like Blue Ocean Mariculture?
Sure. We started looking at Aquaculture Stewardship Council, or ASC, certification last year. Due to COVID, that was put on hold. We recently re-engaged with a certifier, and we hope to be certified by the end of this year. At that point, we will be the only aquaculture operation in the US with ASC certification. For me, I look at it a little bit differently, and this might be a nuanced approach, but I think is important for any aquaculture producer, and that is the standard. Certification is great. It gets us market access. It gets us insurance with the supply chain. But for us, the important part is following a standard that helps us perform at the optimal level in our operation. It helps us understand what metrics we should be tracking, how often we should be looking at effluent and tracking our fish in, fish out ratios and ensuring that we're doing all of that in a sustainable way. And whether we get certified at the end of the process or not, it's an important tool for us to be able to run a successful aquaculture operation, and one that is run sustainably.
Great. So we just heard about kind of specific examples that the CPAC members and Blue Ocean Mariculture are doing to promote sustainability in their businesses. We've heard about how seafood certifications can play a role as a tool to help them achieve those goals. But now I want to look at the government's role. So Danielle, you explained to us a little bit about the role of responsible marine aquaculture in helping us develop a more sustainable seafood supply. But what are some specific examples of how NOAA is contributing to sustainable marine aquaculture development in the U.S.?
Sure. NOAA has long understood the importance of aquaculture and growing an aquaculture industry in the United States. It has importance with coastal resiliency, year-round jobs, and overall sustainability of our seafood sector, including seafood in the future, as we've talked about. Some of the contributions that we do really fall into a couple of different bins of activities. NOAA at its heart is a science agency, so we do a lot of research to both inform decision makers as well as help industry grow. Some of that specific research is related to a national algal library that any shellfish grower in the country can contact us, and we can help put together their perfect diet for larval shellfish before they get outplanted into the marine environment. We also have advanced capacity in species development. So one example of that is sablefish, where our researchers have taken wild sablefish into the aquaculture environment. They are able to rear them in captivity and have what is called closed the life cycle. So they're able to get them to reproduce, which is really exciting. So then it's our job to help transition that into the commercial industry. That transfer is a critical component of the research that we do. And we often rely on another part of NOAA to help support in that, and that's the National Sea Grant College Program. So Sea Grant not only has a large aquaculture grant program that helps get funding into academia and other institutions to advanced aquaculture science, but they also have extension agents. And those extension agents are charged with making sure that they know all of the latest and greatest when it comes to aquaculture science, whether it be from inside the agency or outside, and getting that into the hands of farmers so that they have the ability to use the latest and greatest that researchers are finding right there on their farms. We also have a component of our work that is on the regulatory and policy side. So looking at ways to enable growth. One of those is through the development of what are called aquaculture opportunity areas. This is something that's called for in the executive order. And the idea is finding appropriate space for aquaculture to develop using our science, largely coming from another one of our partner agencies, the National Ocean Service. They have an incredible cadre of spatial scientists, as well as millions of data sets that they use to help find appropriate space for aquaculture. And again, looking at that triple bottom line, appropriate means that it's appropriate ecologically, that we're finding space for aquaculture where the ocean conditions support sustainability, as well as sustainable economically, that it's going to be close enough to shore, that it's economically viable, or maybe even close enough to a processing plant that already exists or a dock that already exists, and appropriate socially. So meaning again that we're not really impacting other users, that we're doing our best to find space that is not already occupied, and having that conversation with the public about where we should go.
Great. So just to make sure that I'm getting a good recap here. So NOAA conducts some of the science and research to help us better understand how we can produce seafood more sustainably. But then you also, through your NOAA Sea Grant program, have that ability to then bridge the science with the actual application in the real world. And then you also have policy and regulatory tools that you can use to help kind of tie all of those pieces together. Am I capturing that correctly?
We sure do. And we also have some communication ability that I should have mentioned. And I think that education and make sure that folks know that aquaculture of today is not aquaculture of, 30, 40 years ago. So we have a whole team that's charged with trying the word out.
And that's actually a great point. I'm going to go a little off script here. I want to bounce off of the education piece a little bit because it is so important. And I would love to hear Dick and Rob's take on this. And how important is the role of outreach and education with the public to get them to understand the value of sustainable seafood? Dick, we'll start with you on that question.
It's incredibly important. And I've been in the fish business for 35 years, and we've always been in a bit of a reactive mode. I think now that we are getting our house in order, our ability to be proactive and getting out and educating the public is critical to the growth of aquaculture. I was speaking to a neighbor the other day and letting them know what I did, and their reply was, are these real fish or do you grow them? And that confused me and threw me back a bit, but that's the public perception and understanding. I have a role in a group called Stronger America Through Seafood. We're looking to help to raise awareness on the political front, and groups like Seafood Nutrition Partnership are doing an excellent job at building programs to educate the consumer. And I think we all have a role to ensure that we're doing our best to build tools that educate on the health and benefits of eating aquaculture seafood products.
Great. And Rob, how about you? From your perspective through CPAC and your members, how valuable or how important is education and outreach?
It's critical, very important. Like Dick and Danielle have said, it's we can only grow the production of responsibly farmed seafood if we have a well-educated and informed customer and consumer base. And there's a lot of rhetoric, misunderstandings, misperceptions, and so clear, concise, reliable information that's available and well channeled so that it's effective, in its reach is really important and would help a lot of the circular conversations on some of the issues that really, were previous issues, but are not currently.
Great. So clearly, broader education outreach plays an important role, and we've heard this from the government perspective, we're hearing this from a farmer's perspective, and we're hearing this from someone who works with a coalition of members throughout the seafood supply chain. So we know that this is important. But I want to get back to the government's role. And Danielle, you had mentioned this in the beginning when you talked about some of your responsibilities. And one of those was to execute the new executive order that was put into place by the White House in May of this year. So can you just talk a little bit more about the executive order and how that order may help to support a more sustainable seafood supply in the future?
Yeah. The executive order has the intention to make U.S. seafood more competitive in a world marketplace, as well as strengthen our economy by growing our seafood sector and improving our food security, meaning that we are producing a little bit more food here at home. When it comes to aquaculture, it asks the federal government to do, the various federal agencies to do a number of things, and NOAA is not the lead for all of them, but I'll step through a couple of the key ones. One is that it asks us to communicate to the public about what are all the regulatory requirements to get an aquaculture permit, and who are all the players involved? What agencies do I need to speak with, both in states and in the federal government? We also are asked to communicate out about the various grant programs. I mentioned the Sea Grant program, which is a very large one for aquaculture, but there are a whole host of others that are applicable to aquaculture, and we're going to have them all in one place so that folks can go and see that. In addition, it asks us to evaluate whether or not we should redraft our National Aquaculture Development Plan. Folks may not know that we have a National Aquaculture Development Plan because it's from 1983. It was written in response to the 1980 Aquaculture Act, and aquaculture has changed a whole lot since 1983. So we're looking across the federal agencies at revamping that, and what would a new National Aquaculture Development Plan look like, and what should we be targeting? How should the government be helping? The executive order also asks that we reassess national aquatic animal health. And we have an existing national aquatic animal health plan. That means sort of the health of the cultured species, making sure that they're disease-free, best practices, things like that. And USDA is looking at updating that sort of guidebook for the industry, as well as the regulatory community. And another key thing that I mentioned earlier, and I think probably came up in your siting conversation, is this development of the aquaculture opportunity areas. And I think that that's probably the most innovative thing in the executive order with regard to aquaculture, this concept of proactively finding space that's appropriate for industry to grow. I say it's innovative because here in the US, it really is doing this planning ahead of time, looking holistically at the environment, talking about carrying capacity, all of these sustainability parameters that we know are important, but looking at them proactively. It's not really innovative worldwide. This is a practice that many other countries have employed to find appropriate space and then govern that space accordingly. So we have the ability to learn from our other partners globally, and that's also an exciting thing to be looking forward to.
Great, and I'm so glad that you ended with the partners globally discussion, because I think that's a good tie-in to what I want to talk about next. So, you mentioned before one of the key roles that NOAA plays is bringing the science to the table and then connecting it to the applicability. And then you were just talking about some of the roles that the science that NOAA brings to the table will also play through the execution of the executive order to help support a more sustainable domestic aquaculture supply. So, Rob, we're going to start with you on this one. From an industry perspective, can you give some examples of how your CPAC members are leveraging science and technology to improve sustainability throughout the supply chain?
Yeah, well, it's really important to rely on good science and evidence-based decision-making. And CPAC members have supported innovative operational efficiency technologies. So I can give a lot of examples. We have worked with research projects, so a team from Johns Hopkins University, Arizona State University, and the University of Florida. I've been doing a study on energy use, water use, and seafood loss for the top seafood species consumed in the US. So being involved in that, you know, beyond helping to contribute to improved energy use and water efficiency and reduce seafood loss, is that members gain a sense of their own data and where they are. They're able to compare themselves to the industry average. But through our grant program with CPAC, we've funded a number of research-based projects. Recently, we're just finishing one, or it's being finished with the City University in Hong Kong, developing environmental DNA tools for early detection of pathogens relevant to aquaculture. We've funded a project to control sea lice infections in farmed Atlantic salmon on Canada's west coast using natural species there. LED light trials to improve catch selectivity in wild capture fisheries. Development and testing of a smart crustacean trap for lobster and crab fishermen to use an innovative technology there. So, and just this week we announced a joint work program with the Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability, GDST, so to support the work on interoperable, verifiable, and efficient seafood traceability. So, you know, a voluntary standard, but also an implementation plan to bring it and the benefits of it to the industry.
Wow, that's quite a portfolio. I feel like we could just have a discussion on all the crazy stuff you guys are putting out there. So that's great. So we know then that your members are not only themselves participating in these efforts to implement the science and technology, but then also through your CPAC program, you guys are also funding some of these efforts to move them forward. So Dick, I want to hear from you at the farm level. How is Blue Ocean Mariculture leveraging some of this science and technology to improve your practices?
Sure, it's about optimizing our practices, but also optimizing our profitability. Science and technology is the tools that are going to get us there. We're fortunate here at Blue Ocean Mariculture in a couple of ways. First is we're located in Hawaii in an ocean technology park in Kona. Within this OTech park, there are multiple organizations that are startups and incubated through groups like Hatch, who are looking at artificial intelligence, unique camera systems, automated feeding solutions, and just new ways to help the aquaculture industry get better. We work with many of those small startup companies and let them pilot different ways of implementing their tools on our farm to be able to learn, and at the same time we learn. Within the ownership group of Blue Ocean, there is also a few different organizations. One is called NOAA, the other is called Center for Aquaculture Technologies, or CAT. They're focused on both the equipment that can make aquaculture operations perform more efficiently and effectively, also looking at the health and well-being of the fish. So we're doing things like selective breeding trials, nutritional and digestibility on feed. All these inputs impact the way that our farm operates, and that at the end of the day, how profitable we are, and thereby how successful we are as an operation. Blue Ocean is relatively in a different situation than a lot of different prospective offshore aquaculture operations, in that we are so close to shore. We're only less than a half a mile from the shoreline. We have strong access to both deep water and surface water at our facility. and we're close to a harbor, and we're working with native fish, and all of those help when it comes to ensuring that we are doing things sustainably and profitably. But at the end of the day, if we're not looking at technological advances and innovation as a way to move our facility forward, then we're going to fall behind.
So it's very clear that responsible seafood and really responsible marine aquaculture development is a team sport. You have to collaborate. You have the government agency of the science coming from there, the Sea Grant extension agents who are helping to apply that. Then you have the individual technology and innovations being developed by these businesses, and the NOAA complex that you had mentioned with Blue Ocean, and the Hatch group that you're working with. So these are all great examples of different entities working together. Collaboration is clearly key for sustainability, but there's a different type of collaboration that CPAC is really unique with, which is competing businesses working together and what is called pre-competitive collaboration. So Rob, can you tell us a little bit more about why this type of pre-competitive collaboration is so important for sustainable seafood, and why do some businesses struggle with this pre-competitive collaboration?
Yeah, well, pre-competitive collaboration is so important because businesses exist in a competitive marketplace, but sustainability is a pre-competitive conversation, and it needs to be a pre-competitive conversation where competitors are united as colleagues on the same side of complex sustainability issues that are urgent and are larger than what one company can tackle or manage on their own. So, I mean, pre-competitive collaboration is about the long-term viability of a product over the scarcity of sales of that product. And without assured supply of seafood to sell, there'll be no consumers to compete for. And I think CPAC members recognize the responsibility to engage and fund some of the improvement work going on, and also recognize the best way to do that is to do it together. So they're bringing businesses together, creating an economy of scale, and learning from each other and creating positive outcomes that'll really move the needle on issues. I think for businesses that struggle with that concept or are stuck with old antiquated thinking, that you compete on everything to get ahead. It's not so. The business case for sustainability is clear. Sustainable business is good business. And we see that the industry is in transition. There's a movement and a shift that's happening globally towards more responsible and more sustainable seafood production and consumption. And industry needs to be squarely involved in a leadership role and respond to the challenges with their own innovation and collaboration. I think the leaders in this transition will be those companies that find ways to collaborate and work together, that find common goals and a shared vision for a better industry and a better future, and then drive the industry improvements required to enable a sustainable long-term supply of seafood.
Great. So it's very clear that we need this collaboration. And so Danielle, I want to now turn to you. So we just learned about pre-competitive collaboration where potential competitors might collaborate. So you guys are also working with some of these competing and non-competing entities through these public-private partnerships. Can you talk about those and the role that they play in helping to support a more sustainable seafood supply?
Sure. We have a number of different ways that we consider partnerships and collaboration. One, of course, is all of the federal grant opportunities, where the federal government is making sure that important research move forward, whether that be research done by industry or academic institutions or otherwise. So we think those grant opportunities are in many ways a partnership with the public, as well as we do a number of different collaborative research where we can work with industry or academic institutions where our researchers are working together to answer the same question. That's a pretty traditional government research role, to work with academic institutions on the same project. And then one of the innovative ways that we can work with industry is through various types of agreements. And while there are various types of agreements, what they all enable is true partnership of public-private parties. So our researchers can help directly in an industry lab, or we can have industry researchers come into our laboratory, again, answering the same question or answering different questions or tackling the question from different angles. We have a lot more flexibility than I think people realize. I think folks think of the government as sort of this monolith that has its doors closed, and that's just not the case. We can have folks in our labs anytime we like, and we look forward to collaborating with folks because that's the only way we're going to effectively move forward. No one entity can answer all of the questions that need to be answered, nor should they. That we need input from various stakeholder groups and various communities to answer some of these big questions. So we have a lot of ability to do that, and our door is always open.
Great. So we just learned about the very important role of collaboration on the competitive side, the non-competitive side, between the academic and research side and the industry side with government. But there's another piece to these, maybe not so much collaboration, but building relationships. And part of being a responsible actor is being a good neighbor. In a previous segment, we had discussed some of the social components of marine aquaculture, and the researchers in that panel were very adamant that businesses need to proactively engage in two-way communications with the communities in which they operate. So Rob, I'm going to start with you. Can you give us some examples of how CPAC members are developing more meaningful relationships with the communities and stakeholders?
Yeah, well, I mean, CPAC members, many are longstanding businesses, some multi-generational family businesses. So they're rooted in the past, they're dedicated to the future, they're connected to the communities that they started and developed and grew with. And they care about the communities they operate in, and as well as the communities that their supply partners are based and engaged with. So I think, you know, we have a charter, a CPAC charter, where we collectively agree on 8 key points. And one of them is to consider the impact on communities when making sourcing decisions. So that's a key tenet of CPAC's membership and our mission and our operational protocol. And so, you know, seafood supply chains are only as strong as the weakest link. And so recognizing that, you know, good relationships with communities and with various stakeholders is really critical. And it just is core to I guess the concept of being a good neighbor, but being recognizing being in the middle of the supply chain, that it's a connectivity agent role and responsibility. And so just being a good listener, being aware of what issues are, and trying to adapt and respond to you know, bring our collective expertise in the industry and knowledge, but also our resources of time and finances to bear on issues and challenges, not only that we face, but that our community members face and other stakeholders that we engage with face, so that we engage on it and do it in a collaborative way, so that the impact on communities is front and center in those decision making.
So just to recap what you were saying, so again, this term collaboration comes up, and it's important to look at these relationships throughout the supply chain, and it fits within that the 3 pillars of sustainability, right? The social element, which is why your CPAC members are engaged in building these relationships with their communities. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, we are a collaboration, but there have been a number of collaborations that have developed over the years, and now we're starting to try and model and inspire collaborations between those collaborations, like with the joint work program with the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, where you get two important platforms combining their work and their resources on a shared goal. And you know, we're having those conversations with GSSI, Global CBOS as well, and other collaborations. So, you know, between a number of different stakeholders, we're able to develop, you know, like you asked, more meaningful relationships on a higher collaboration level.
Sticking with this concept of making meaningful connections and being a good neighbor, you know, one of the things that did come up in that siting discussion that you did mention is the role that marine spatial planning, or even more specific of an example, the aquaculture opportunity zones might play in helping to make those more meaningful connections. So can you talk about that a little bit more and how these processes might help with that community engagement?
Siting is the key to so many factors in aquaculture, including this sort of social, neighborly conversation. And it's at the core of the idea of developing these aquaculture opportunity areas. We're bringing that conversation of appropriate space to communities before there's an actual farm on the line. We're proactively having these conversations. So we have this incredible depth of scientific data and millions of data sets that form all these data layers in GIS to inform where appropriate space may be. But there's also a fundamental piece of this conversation that has to be engaging directly with the public. It's not just all about data sets. And part of the conversation with the public is, do we have them all? So in developing aquaculture opportunity areas, we're using that foundation of the scientific knowledge that we have. And then we're also doing public input sessions. We're going to the public both through webinars as well as through the sort of bureaucratic Federal Register process where folks can submit their public comment. And we're going to be doing that in the next couple of weeks, actually. So we made an announcement about aquaculture opportunity areas a couple of weeks ago. And that announcement was that we are going to be looking within the waters of Southern California and the Gulf of Mexico to find aquaculture opportunity areas. And as we look to find those appropriate spaces, I mentioned all of the science that we have, but we're going to be coming to the public and asking a whole series of questions of what are some of the things that you think are important we consider? Are there any places where we know you don't think we should go? Are there places that you think are perfect that we should really look into? In addition to that, those specific questions about the Southern California and Gulf of Mexico investigations, we're also asking the public, where should we investigate next? What communities want aquaculture to come to them? And I think that that invitation is a great opportunity for states, local communities, or industry to tell us, we really think it's appropriate that we do some of these investigations in X region or Y region. So I think that doing some of this proactively, as a planning process and not just a part of the permitting process, lets everyone take a deep breath. There's not any particular project on the line. We're just having a conversation and making sure that everyone can participate.
Great. So Dick, we just heard from Danielle about kind of that larger government role with engaging with these communities and starting to build that relationship and trust in the planning phases of aquaculture development. But you are an aquaculture producer who is active in the water. So how is it that Blue Ocean Mariculture engages in meaningful dialogue and connections with your local communities? How are you guys a good neighbor?
Sure, it's really interesting, even though we're the only open ocean mariculture operation right now. We were founded in 2001 by Neil Sims, a pioneer in this industry, as Kona Blue. And at the time, it took Neil over 3 years to get through not just the permitting process, but the public consultation. We made sure in those early days that everyone had a voice and that their input was critical into ensuring that we launched in a way that had all of the stakeholder support that we wanted and needed at the time. We try to carry that forward through everything that we do. We do things like give fish to the local food banks and such. The biggest program that we had started right at the beginning of COVID was to bring in educators to teach them about aquaculture. As an extension of that, we were planning and still plan when we can to bring in school classes to be able to walk them through our hatchery, show them that there is a future in aquaculture if they were interested, give them access to resources, and teach them that what we do is the best thing for the health and safety of the public. In addition to that, we put a lot of stake into being a good neighbor here in Hawaii. As we've mentioned, we're located in the Natural Energy Lab, or NELHA, and our neighbors, whether it's Forever Ocean or Oceanera, we work closely with them all. We try to figure out how we can best develop a collaborative relationship. And even within the last or latest cohort at Hatch, groups like Symbrosia and Sea Warden are doing some amazing work. And part of being a good neighbor is giving them opportunities to try out their technological developments and see if they work in the real world. And we're excited to be able to do that. We want to be an exemplary illustration of what can be possible in open ocean aquaculture, because if we're not transparent, if we can't open the doors and let people see what we're doing, it won't be as easy for those companies that are applying for permits within those opportunity zones that Danielle mentioned to be able to launch in a profitable way.
So Dick, so you just gave a great kind of segue, giving that example of how you as an existing operation in U.S. waters, and unfortunately there really aren't that many, especially in offshore waters, and what you do could really impact the future of what we could potentially do in the future. So I'm going to start with you on this very key important question, which is, can we develop a responsible marine aquaculture sector in the U.S. that is economically viable but also environmentally sustainable? And can we do it now?
That is a great question. I think environmentally and socially, we can easily get there. Economically, it's still to be determined. If you go back 10 years, the inputs, land, power, feed, everything was too expensive, and efficiencies have brought down a lot of those costs, but there's still challenges. You're raising fish offshore, which has a lot of inherent risk. You then need to get those fish onshore, processed and sold. And whether you can do that in a triple bottom line approach and do it in a way that benefits everyone is still the jury's out on that.
And Rob, how about you? Can we develop a marine aquaculture sector in the U.S. that is both economically viable and environmentally sustainable? And can we do it now?
Well, I'm optimistic. I think we can do it, and I think we should do it. And I think Danielle at NOAA and Dick at Blue Ocean Mariculture are leading the way. And I think aquaculture is vital for supporting domestic seafood production, for good year-round jobs, and a lot of the benefits for species and habitat protection, for coastal resilience. Aquaculture is one of the most resource-efficient ways to produce protein. We're advocating for the expansion of responsible domestic aquaculture to grow the amount of production and reduce the reliance on imported farm seafood. So we can't do it if we don't believe we can and find a way to do it. So it's going to take energy and effort, and there's there's technologies and questions along the way, but I think we can and should and will do it.
Danielle, last word on this question. Can we develop a marine aquaculture sector in the U.S. that is both economically viable and environmentally sustainable? And can we do it now?
Absolutely. And we already are. I think that it's easy to get wrapped up in what our future is going to look like because it's very exciting and it has to change. We have to grow aquaculture, but we do have a thriving aquaculture industry in the US already. We are leaders in shellfish development. We have existing farms showcasing what the future can look like Blue Ocean Mariculture and others that are in the pipeline. I think that to Rob's point, we have to believe that we can do it. And I absolutely do. To get the industry to grow, I think there are some things that we need to focus on, cutting edge research to help the industry develop and cut down on some of the impactful costs, as well as clarity and sort of a logical nature of a permitting system, as well as helping update those outdated perceptions that might be slowing aquaculture's growth in communities where we really need to do some of that education and outreach.
Great. So it does sound like it is possible. As Dick mentioned, there may be some concerns with the economic component of it, but there is potential to grow and expand responsible marine aquaculture in the U.S. So I want to close, though, with some key takeaways for our audience. I'm going to put you in the hot seat and ask for one recommendation here. Dick, we're going to start with you. What is the one most important thing that needs to happen to garner broader public support for marine aquaculture development in the U.S.?
Public support, I think, is around education. We need to be better at talking about the benefits of aquaculture. We need to educate people on not just the health, but the low impact that aquaculture can have on the environment. At Blue Ocean Mariculture, we've never used an antibiotic and don't plan to do so. And yet that's the first question that people ask me is, how do we manage our antibiotic use? And it's a given that any aquaculture operation needs to use antibiotics. And those kinds of issues that have plagued us from our past need to be addressed, and we need to get people thinking about seafood in general rather than thinking about wild versus farmed.
And Rob, how about you? What is the one most important thing that needs to happen to help garner public support for marine aquaculture development in the U.S.?
It's education and awareness. From my perspective, despite the continued growth and rapid expansion of aquaculture globally, there remains a stigma around farmed seafood in North America. And I think if we can just broaden the understanding of the role that aquaculture plays in our food system in supporting a healthy diet, as well as raising awareness about how ecosystem impacts of aquaculture compare with other proteins, and just awareness and knowledge for people, the choices that individuals and organizations can make to reduce the negative impacts of food production. And farming more seafood is a key way to do that.
And Danielle, once again, you have the last word on this question. What is the one most important thing that needs to happen to help garner public support for marine aquaculture development in the U.S.?
I have to echo those that came before me, is building that understanding of what aquaculture is today. Folks are buying aquaculture seafood in the marketplace. More than half of the seafood in US grocery stores is farmed and folks are buying it. So there's sort of a disconnect between consumer behavior and the rhetoric about the conversation of developing aquaculture here in the US, where it would be under the strictest or among the strictest environmental regulations globally. I'm going to also add in that I think that for aquaculture to grow, not only do we need to garner that public support, but I think we need to continue to build partnerships that whether it be industry to industry partnerships, those pre-competitive partnerships, public-private partnerships, partnerships with academic institutions. We have to work cohesively together to create that enabling environment for the industry to grow. It's not the responsibility of any particular organization. We have to do it all together.
Great. So Danielle, Dick, Rob, I learned so much for you guys. It's always a pleasure talking to you. So what we learned today is that it is very important to invest in and apply science and technology for responsible production. We learned the really important role that collaboration and partnerships play in sustainable seafood production. We learned about being a good neighbor and the important role that engaging and having meaningful relationships with those communities are. And then, of course, all of you closed with the really critical importance of outreach and education. And by the way, I did not pay them to say that. But thank you for plugging that. But thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And to those of you at home, thank you for joining us. And again, you can visit aquariumofpacific.org for the bios from these speakers, additional resources from this and other panels in this series. Thank you very much. Now go eat some seafood.